But when you hear this, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So there'll be a quiz after this, so you'll be part of our ambassador program. So please listen up. Without further ado, Dr. Erick Won.
Thanks, JD. Really excited to be here with all of you. It's always an honor to be around a bunch of veterans. Kind of feels like coming home, being able to talk banter and hold units and whatnot. So I was stationed just up the road here at Camp Pendleton with the HMM 268, deployed with the 11th MU. I was a Navy flight surgeon, so was also at Navy Medical Center San Diego. So we'll walk through all of this, but as questions come up, please don't hesitate to ask. We can be very informal. But in my travels, I got to meet Dr. Hickey. He's the Navy Special Warfare Command Surgeon at Dam Neck, Virginia. And he had shared with me this technology, saved about a dozen of his operators. It was hard for me to believe at the time that I came across this technology that something existed that could help people with traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress, and these kind of conditions. Because I was throwing everything I had at these problems, and not a lot of things were helping. We'll do some statistical analyses to show how these technologies might help people who may be struggling. But as I went to different clinics, I couldn't help but notice there weren't just veterans, there were these elite athletes, whether they're US Olympians, NFL players, NBA players, and they were all talking about how this technology helped them. Nick Harvick, I know the Chargers are a little controversial in San Diego, but he's a great human being, and I would say is passionate about not necessarily this technology, but just brain health and helping his alumni who are struggling with traumatic brain injuries and concussions. And some of the earliest adopters of the technology are amazing physicians. Vern has become a very good friend of mine. He's a team doctor for the Dodgers, Lakers, Angels, and Rams. And he talks about how this has really changed the way that he practices medicine. And we'll walk through some of that as well. So what are we talking about? This is a three-step process. The first step that you see on your right is something we call an electroencephalogram, or an EEG. I know that's a mouthful, but it's a 10-minute neuroimaging study. It doesn't hurt. You just sit in a room, you close your eyes, and 10 minutes later we have an image of your brain. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. That's run through computational analytics. We have a lab up in Newport Beach where we have neuroscientists who look at these EEGs, and we're looking for disruptions in activity. And we can show those to you, and we can talk about how we want to restore function to that circuit. And then we use this third step, the coil that you see. It's a figure-8 coil. We place that anywhere we see disruption, and we provide gentle stimulation to the brain. It doesn't hurt. You just sit in a comfortable chair for about 15 to 30 minutes, and it'll provide gentle pulses to your brain and restore the natural function that used to be there before you had an injury or were exposed to traumatic stress. And so we can see these things in real time, but importantly, you can track these longitudinally over time to see if you're making progress. And this is one of those images. And this is slowed down about 100 times. Your brain operates very fast. And you can see the predominance of activities in the back and middle of the brain. This is a 20-year veteran who worked in explosive ordnance disposal. He estimates he had about 10,000 microconcussions to the front of his brain. And so you can see there's a lack of activity in the front of his brain. That's important because the prefrontal cortex is where a lot of organization of thought happens, impulse control, executive function. And if you have trouble accessing those areas of the brain, you can imagine it would manifest as certain behaviors, whether it's anger management issues or impulsivity. A lot of these people will gamble, and organizing thoughts and connecting dots becomes a little bit more challenging. And for him, he would tell you his healing journey started once he could see it. Because a lot of doctors, he'd go to the VA, he'd go to his DOD doctors, they'd get CTs and MRIs, which are still images. They're not dynamic images like this where you can see brain function. And if he didn't have a bleed or if he didn't have a tumor, he was told, your brain image is normal. And then he would feel like he was weak or he just was dysfunctional. Now he could see that there was a functional abnormality. And the question became, how do I fix that? And he became his own best advocate. He started sleeping better, he started exercising more, he started eating right. And with our treatment, we uniquely can reactivate neurons in the front of the brain. And so we'll show you a bit about what that looks like as well. I won't go too much into the science, but we're entering this new era of neuroimaging where we can look at specific circuits. And Stanford, just as an example, is very interested in the salience network because that's associated with depression. They've actually invented a new therapy called the SAINT protocol. It's this Stanford Accelerated Intelligence Neuromodulation Therapy Protocol. It's a great breakthrough for humanity. Right? We're seeing a lot of improvements non-pharmaceutically for depression. WAVE Neuroscience is very interested in the default mode network because that's associated with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. So for the last 15 years, this is something we've been obsessing about. How do we fix the DMN? And not just our studies, like we've got large third-party data showing that the DMN gets disrupted in PTSD. It doesn't have to be concussions like blast injuries. This can be losing a daughter to cancer. This can be losing a friend to combat. And these sort of traumatic injuries have an emotional toll that you can now visualize with neuroimaging. That, I think, is a profound change. Before, we were told, hopefully nobody in this room, but a lot of times, in the 70s and 80s, it was just kind of suck it up. You need to manage this, meditate. And we'll joke, like I can say this, like take some ibuprofen, like the military doctor would throw certain things at these problems that may or may not have been helpful. But now with the benefit of these neuroimaging, we can look at how fast does your brain process information. So the peak that you see is how many times per second someone can process information measured as a hertz. So it's about a 10.5 hertz brain. And you see the alignment from front to center to back, that's something we call alpha coherence. So that cycling is something we call the alpha rhythm. And the alignment that you see from the front to the center to the back of the brain is something we call coherence. This middle image is a young NCAA swimmer. She was an unrestrained passenger in a taxi accident. She struck her head, lost consciousness. And you see the stereotypical response of neurons to injury is they slow down. They go into hibernation mode. And she's at 6 hertz in the front and the middle of the brain, 10 hertz in the back of the brain. And that information mismatch, in her case, manifested as profound headaches. She had photophobia, which means she couldn't tolerate light. She had to drop out of school. And she came to us in a pretty terrible condition. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, she was wearing a hoodie, was very upset and angry at the world. And our goal with treatment would be to nudge those neurons that are 6 hertz back to the right, and 10 hertz, and restore that alpha coherence that we see on the your left image. And indeed, after 2 weeks, we were able to do that. And so her headaches ameliorated, she was able to go back to school, she found a concussion protocol, and the happy ending to that story, she competed in the 2021 Olympics. So not everyone's going to have that great of a response. It is a common thing that we see. But if you have a high level understanding of what we're trying to achieve, you can read brain waves down. And that's something we want to make available to everyone. We call it democratizing brain health. So everyone here should know how their brain is functioning. And it's many times not something that you can discreetly remember, where I was in a car accident and I lost consciousness. Many times it's years of chronic sleep deprivation because you're working too hard, maybe there's a life stressor, you go through a divorce, you have children who are struggling in school, so you stay up with them to do their homework, and you're getting 3 hours of sleep a night. That kind of thing takes its toll on the brain. You can see it now. So that doesn't always mean that you need this treatment. A lot of people will just get better by taking care of themselves. So, yes ma'am?
I don't know if you want to take questions now or at the end, but I was curious you may get to this. Are you doing anything with Alzheimer's patients or dementia patients with this?
We can talk about that. There's another company that's doing that.
Okay.
And so I think, in our lifetimes, I think those interventions are going to happen. I'll say probably in the next 5 years. So the company named Cognito. They just had like an $85 million raise. They're entering phase 3 trials. So it's a similar technology to ours, but they're using fMRI as a guidance tool rather than EEG. We've seen some benefit, but not as much as they're using a very specific type of protocol that I think is beneficial for cognitive decline. Yeah. Great question. And so what does this mean from a data perspective? Well, one of our first studies was done actually at UC San Diego and up here at Mission Hospital, and it was 21 veterans who had PTSD, and we saw 42% improvement in symptoms. So that's pretty dramatic. The VA considers anything more than 10% clinically meaningful. So 40% was something that I hadn't seen before. It was to the point where I questioned, is that real? And I'll show you my first patient in a few slides. The second study, this is just an illustration of when you look at each of those cases, you can see the pre-treatment and the post-treatment, everybody moved in the right direction. Everyone improved. That was important to me because with other modalities like exposure therapy or psychopharma, about 10% of people will get worse. And so the first principle of medicine in Latin is prima non nocere, means first do no harm. And so I can't say nobody will have a side effect, but because we're using physics instead of psychopharma, there are fewer side effects. The most common side effect is a transient headache, usually alleviated by over-the-counter ibuprofen or Tylenol. But it's important to understand that most people will see a benefit. The new data that we're seeing is about 80% of people will have positive response to the technology. We don't always know why 15 to 20% of people don't respond, but they're not getting worse, I think is an important element to this. They did a double-blind randomized control trial. This is the gold standard of medical research. And the line in gray that you see, I'm not sure how it's reflecting on the screen, but the line in gray is a placebo group, and the line in blue is a treatment group. And the treatment group did better than the placebo group. The placebo effect is very real. Like that placebo group had about a 30% response to treatment. The treatment group had over a 40% response to treatment. So we can see that the treatment was better than placebo. And in fact, when we continued that treatment for 2 more weeks, for a total of 4 weeks, we saw that we were better than 40% improvement. I'm sorry, it says 34% improvement in symptoms using this scale, the PCLM. We have new data that's better than that. The protocol has improved over time because we're using